Mr. President, it was 19 years ago when I introduced a bill called the DREAM Act. And the DREAM Act said if you came to the United States under the age of 18, if you grew up in this country, went to school, no problems with the law, you ought to be given a chance at some point later in life to earn your way to legal status and citizenship. That was the bill. It was introduced, as I mentioned, about 19 years ago. It's never become the law of the land. But at one point, I went to one of my Senate co-sponsors, who happened to be elected president, named Barack Obama, and said to him, can you do anything as president to help in this situation? So many of these young people are undocumented. They're living in the only country they've ever known, and they have no future because of their citizenship status, immigration status. He created the DACA program. And under the DACA program, if you qualified as I just described, you would come forward and pay $500 or $600 for a filing fee, go through a criminal background check, and if you were approved, you would be allowed to stay in the United States for 2 years at a time under this DACA protection, renewable every 2 years, and you would be able to stay without fear of deportation and be allowed to legally work in this country. President Obama agreed to do it. And when he did, 800,000 young people came forward and received DACA protection. For the longest time, President Trump would give speeches talking about these wonderful young people who deserve a chance to have a future in the United States. But then in September of 2017, he changed his mind. And when he changed his mind, unfortunately, he eliminated the DACA program. Now it's being contested in court. And next week, 6 days from now, across the street in the Supreme Court, they're going to argue as to whether or not the president had the power to end this program. As you might imagine, there are almost 800,000 young people who will be listening carefully to those arguments and waiting for a decision of the Supreme Court. They currently have temporary protection because of the pending lawsuit, but if we lose before the Supreme Court, they'll be subject to deportation. That would be a sad outcome. In many cases, it would be a tragic outcome. I'm hoping that my colleagues in the Senate will follow this carefully. This is one thing we ought to agree on. Senator Lindsey Graham, conservative, Republican, South Carolina, is my co-sponsor of the DREAM Act. And he has joined with me in saying that we ought to make legal status available to these young people through the DREAM Act. I hope that that ends up being the case. And I'd like to close by telling a story on the floor here about this young man. His name is Ernesto de la Rosa. This is the 118th story I've told on the floor of the Senate about dreamers, people protected by DACA. He's the, as I said, 118th example I can give to my colleagues in the Senate and those following this debate as to why we need to have DACA or the DREAM Act as a law of the land. Let me tell you a story. Ernesto was brought to the United States from Mexico when he was a child. He grew up in the Midwest in Dodge City, Kansas. He came to the United States legally. He applied for a green card while he was still in legal status. He wanted to become a lawful permanent resident. But the line for green cards was too long. You might remember an earlier statement I made in debate today. The line was so long that Ernesto's visa expired before he received his green card. Under the laws of America, he was undocumented. It is not well known that millions of undocumented immigrants came to the United States legally in the first place, but they're unable to become permanent legal residents because our immigration system is broken. Here's what Ernesto says about it, quote, "We all hear comments about get back in line and do it legally. Well, we tried, but the system right now is so complex that it takes up to 20 years to attain legal status." When he first arrived, Ernesto, from Mexico, did not speak or read English, but he worked hard and became an honors student in his school. He earned an associate's degree from the Dodge City Community College, a bachelor's degree from Fort Hays State University, and a master's in public administration from Wichita State University. Because of his immigration status, Ernesto was not eligible for any federal financial aid as a student. How did he get through school? He worked 2 jobs. Here's what he says about that experience. Often kids my age enjoy the college lifestyle, hanging out with friends, partying, but I wasn't able to do that. I was so disciplined, I said to myself, I cannot fail a class because I'm going to have to pay out of my pocket to take it again. What is Ernesto doing today? He's the assistant city manager of Dodge City, Kansas. He manages a budget of more than $55 million and directly oversees 20 employees. He's responsible for his city's legislative affairs, working with federal, state, and local representatives on issues such as housing, transportation, and energy. Here's what he says about his job. I love this profession because I'm able to make a difference in my community and advocate to meet the needs of our residents. It is rewarding and fulfilling to serve this great city. Imagine that. Ernesto came to Dodge City unable to speak or read English. Now he is the assistant city manager. This is his story, but it's also America's story. Without DACA, which protected him, gave him a right to this job, none of this would have been possible. Ernesto's dream is to become an American citizen and to advance from assistant city manager to city manager so he can continue to make a difference in people's lives. That can only happen if we do something here on the floor of the United States Senate. The U.S. House of Representatives passed a measure called the American Dream and Promise Act. It would provide for the dreamers that I mentioned earlier, and it would provide for this young man. Senator McConnell refuses to allow us to debate this bill on the floor of the United States Senate. It is unfortunate. Next week, the eyes of Ernesto and hundreds of thousands of dreamers are going to be focused right across the street on the Supreme Court. They are counting on the Supreme Court to do the right thing and reject President Trump's illegal repeal of DACA. They are counting on us who serve in the Senate to solve this crisis that the president has created and to give this young man and thousands just like him a chance. It would be an American tragedy to deport this young man after all that he has achieved and send him back to Mexico, where he hasn't lived since he was a little boy. Will the majority leader give him a chance? I hope so. The Senate should give the American Dream and Promise Act a vote. Mr. President, I yield the floor.